The rapture cope is just too good. The truth they don't want you to know. Let me start with a question that might make you uncomfortable, and I need you to really sit with it. What if the belief that makes you feel the safest right now is actually the one keeping you spiritually asleep? What if the hope you were handed wasn't designed to prepare you for what's coming, but to keep you calm while the ground beneath you slowly cracks? I'm not here to attack your faith. I'm not here to mock what you believe. I'm here because I love Jesus, I love His Word, and I love His people too much to let us drift into comfort without asking hard questions. For many Christians, the idea of the rapture has become a kind of emotional shelter. When the world feels darker, louder, more hostile to faith, we tell ourselves, "Don't worry, we won't be here for the worst part." And for a moment, that thought feels like peace. It lowers our fear. It quiets our urgency. It lets us relax when maybe we were meant to be alert. But comfort and truth are not always the same thing. And faith that only survives in comfort is not the faith Jesus prepared us for. Jesus never built His church on escape plans. He built it on obedience, endurance, and love that holds steady under pressure. The earliest believers didn't expect to disappear before things got hard. They expected to stand faithful even if it cost them everything. Somewhere along the way, that expectation changed, and in its place we adopted a hope that asks very little of us now, but promises everything later. Tonight, I want you to lean in, not with fear, but with honesty. Because if we are living in serious times, then we need serious faith. And if the days ahead demand endurance, then the most loving thing we can do is make sure our hope is strong enough to carry us through, not just make us feel better for the moment. Part 1. Why this idea feels so comforting. Let's be real with each other for a moment. The rapture idea didn't become popular because it was carefully tested against the whole counsel of Scripture. It became popular because it feels good. It speaks directly to a deep human desire we all share, the desire to avoid pain, loss, and uncertainty. When the world feels unstable, when headlines are filled with wars, disasters, and moral confusion, the promise of an early exit sounds like mercy. It sounds loving. It sounds like something a kind God would do for His people. And emotionally, it works. It turns fear into relief. Instead of asking, "How do I stay faithful if things get worse?" we quietly tell ourselves, "I won't need to." Instead of preparing our hearts for endurance, we distract our minds with timelines, signs, and speculation. It shifts our focus from spiritual formation to spiritual prediction. And without realizing it, we begin to measure faith not by obedience, but by optimism. This is where the danger begins, because comfort has a way of disguising itself as truth. If a belief lowers anxiety, removes responsibility, and promises reward without cost, it will always feel right, especially in anxious times. But Scripture has never presented comfort as the test of truth. In fact, again and again, God's truth is introduced as something unsettling before it becomes sustaining. Think about how rarely Jesus comforted people the way we expect comfort today. He didn't tell His followers that things would get easier. He told them to count the cost. He didn't say, "Relax, I'll remove you before suffering comes." He said, "Take up your cross and follow me." A cross was not a symbol of inconvenience. It was a symbol of death. Yet somehow modern faith has turned the call to die into a promise to disappear. Another reason this idea feels so good is because it allows us to postpone urgency. If the worst moments of history belong to someone else, then we don't have to wrestle deeply with courage, sacrifice, or perseverance right now. We can afford to stay spiritually soft. We can delay hard conversations about holiness, conviction, and faith under pressure. After all, if we're leaving early, why train for a battle we think we'll never fight? But here's what that mindset quietly produces. It creates believers who are sincere but fragile. Faith that works beautifully in peaceful conditions but begins to fracture the moment it costs something. And when that cost arrives, social pressure, loss of comfort, rejection, persecution. Many are shocked, not because they don't love Jesus, but because they were never told that following him would demand endurance. There's also a subtle pride hidden inside escape theology. It assumes that this final generation of believers will be spared what every faithful generation before them endured, that somehow we deserve special treatment. Less suffering, fewer trials, more comfort than the apostles, the early church, the martyrs, and the persecuted saints throughout history. Yet Scripture never suggests that spiritual maturity ends in exemption. It ends in faithfulness. The truth is, the rapture idea feels good because it offers hope without preparation. It promises glory without struggle. It reassures us that obedience will never be tested beyond what feels reasonable. But Jesus never described the end times as a season of relaxation. He described them as a season requiring watchfulness, endurance, and unwavering allegiance. Real hope does not remove responsibility. Real hope strengthens us to carry it. Part 2. What Jesus actually promised his followers. If we want to be honest Christians, we have to be honest readers of Scripture, not selective readers, not emotional readers, honest ones. And when we look closely at what Jesus actually said to his followers about the future, one thing becomes immediately clear. He never framed hardship as something his people would avoid. He framed it as something they would face with him. Jesus was remarkably direct. He told his disciples they would be hated for his name. He warned them about betrayal, imprisonment, and death. He spoke openly about deception increasing, love growing cold, and pressure intensifying. And in all of this, he never once said, "Don't worry, you won't be here for this." Instead, he said, "The one who endures to the end will be saved." Endurance only matters if there is something to endure. One of the most revealing moments comes when Jesus prays for his disciples on the night before his crucifixion. Knowing suffering was coming, knowing persecution would scatter them, he lifts his eyes to the Father. And what does he ask? Not that they be taken out of the world, but that they be kept from evil while remaining in it. That prayer alone should force us to slow down and rethink what we've assumed. Jesus understood something we often forget. Removal does not produce maturity. Faithfulness under pressure does. The refining fire is not an accident. It's part of the process. And Jesus never hid this from his followers. He told them in advance so they would not fall away when it happened. Even when Jesus spoke about his return, the emphasis was never on escape, but readiness. He warned against spiritual sleep. He warned against distraction. He warned against being unprepared when the moment arrives. The problem is, many have interpreted readiness as waiting to leave, rather than being faithful enough to stay. Look at the pattern of Jesus' own life. He was not rescued from suffering. He walked straight into it. He did not avoid betrayal, injustice, or death. And if the Son learned obedience through suffering, why do we assume his body will be exempt from it? The promises of Jesus are not weak. They are stronger than escape. He promised his presence. He promised his Spirit. He promised resurrection. He promised that no suffering would be wasted, and no faithfulness would go unseen. But he never promised comfort as the highest good. When we trade those promises for a guarantee of avoidance, we don't strengthen our faith. We shrink it. And in doing so, we risk building our hope on something Jesus never actually offered. The real promise was never that we would be spared from darkness. The real promise was that the darkness would never overcome us. Part 3. How escape theology weakens the church. Now let's talk about what happens when an entire generation of believers starts thinking that faith is primarily about avoidance. It's subtle at first, almost invisible. We begin to measure devotion by comfort instead of courage. We start grading spirituality on how peaceful our lives feel, rather than how faithfully we walk with Jesus when the world pushes back. And slowly, almost without noticing, the church begins to weaken. When we teach Christians that the worst moments will happen to someone else, we stop preparing for real trials. We stop teaching perseverance under pressure. We stop training young believers to carry their cross in a world that will not honor it. Why build resilience for a test we assume we'll never face? Why instruct courage when the assumption is that God's plan includes a secret escape hatch? This creates a dangerous spiritual fragility. Faith becomes sturdy in Sunday services but shaky when real opposition comes. People who have memorized scripture and sung the songs of the church may crumble when confronted with cost, loss, or persecution. They may compromise their convictions because they never learned how to stand when the stakes are high. We see it happening already. Christians who cling to escape theology are quick to abandon boldness for convenience. They are hesitant to speak truth when it might provoke criticism. They avoid standing up for righteousness if it could lead to discomfort. And all of this is subtle, often justified by claiming that we are waiting for the Lord or God will take care of it. But that kind of passive hope is not the hope of Scripture. It's the hope of avoidance. Escape theology also creates a quiet pride in the church. It assumes that this generation deserves to avoid the trials that previous generations endured. The apostles were imprisoned and beaten. Early Christians were thrown to lions. Martyrs faced fire and sword with joy. Yet somehow we've concluded that we are the generation that will be whisked away before the suffering begins. The humility of endurance has been replaced by the arrogance of assumed exemption. Even more, this theology fosters division within the church. It subtly separates believers into those who are in the know about timing, signs, and prophetic predictions, and those who are simply following along. Spiritual maturity is measured by insight into escape, not by depth of character, faith, or endurance. We begin to idolize prediction rather than devotion, speculation rather than obedience. But Scripture repeatedly emphasizes the opposite. Faith is forged in the fire, not sheltered from it. Real strength is not built on comfort. It is forged under trial. And when the church adopts a mindset that prioritizes comfort, we produce believers who are unprepared for the moments that matter most. We risk a church that stands beautifully in theory, but collapses under pressure. Escape theology doesn't just fail to prepare the church, it actively undermines it. It transforms hope into complacency, courage into calculation, and faithfulness into wishful thinking. And the worst part, many don't even recognize the danger, because it feels so reassuring. Comfort feels right. But the truth is, comfort without preparation is dangerous. Comfort without conviction is deadly. The early church, in contrast, grew strongest when facing persecution. Every challenge, every moment of suffering, sharpened their faith. Every threat, every hardship became an opportunity to demonstrate the reality of Christ living in them. That is the model we are called to emulate, not passive believers waiting to be removed from danger. Part 4. The tribulation is a test, not a surprise. Now let's go deeper. Many believers think of the tribulation as something sudden, terrifying, and unexpected. A storm that will catch the world off guard, while they are quietly taken away. But Scripture tells us otherwise. The tribulation is not a surprise. It is a test. It is a refining fire designed to show what is real, what endures, and what will last. Look back through God's story with humanity. Noah wasn't removed from the flood. He was preserved through it. Abraham wasn't spared trials. He was refined in them. Joseph wasn't taken out of slavery. He was elevated through years of suffering. Daniel and the 3 young men in Babylon weren't spared from the lion's den or the fiery furnace. They were protected within it, but they still endured the test. Every faithful figure in Scripture faced hardship. None were given the luxury of avoidance. The tribulation is the same. It is not a cosmic loophole designed to protect a few from pain. It is a moment when faith will be tested, purified, and proven. It separates those whose trust is rooted in Jesus from those whose hope is rooted in comfort, predictions, or emotional reassurance. This truth is difficult because it forces us to confront a harsh reality. Following Jesus is not about finding an easy way out. It's about standing firm when the world is collapsing. It's about courage when everyone else is running. It's about being faithful when consequences are severe. and victory feels distant. And yet this is not a message of despair. It is the message of hope at its strongest. Why? Because God is never absent in our trial. He does not promise removal. He promises presence. He does not promise an easy path. He promises power to endure. Every test is an opportunity for revelation. Every hardship becomes a showcase for the glory of Christ living in his people. Those who cling to comfort-based hope risk missing this reality. They are prepared to disappear, not to stand. They are trained for escape, not endurance. But the faith that pleases God, the faith that will be rewarded, is the faith that perseveres in the fire. It is the faith that declares, even if I am surrounded, betrayed, or persecuted, I will remain faithful, because my hope is not in escape, it is in Jesus. We also need to recognize that the tribulation is not just personal, it is corporate. The church, as a whole, is being tested, not just individuals. God is revealing which communities are built on truth and obedience, and which are built on comfort and convenience. And when the pressure comes, only those who have practiced perseverance, courage, and unwavering trust will stand. The early Christians understood this. They didn't spend their lives calculating the timing of the rapture. They spent their lives preparing for suffering, for witness, for endurance. They were not hoping to vanish from history. They were hoping to impact history with faithfulness. And that is the hope we need today. Not a hope that removes us from the storm, but a hope that carries us through it. The tribulation is not a trap. It is a test. And if we approach it with the mindset that Jesus gave his followers, we will not only survive, we will shine when the world is darkest. Conclusion: stay faithful, stand firm, and follow Jesus. So here's the truth I want you to carry with you. Jesus never promised that following him would be easy. He never promised that faith would protect us from trials, suffering, or opposition. What he promised was far greater: his presence, his strength, his victory, and the assurance that no trial could ever separate us from his love. Real hope is not an early exit. Real hope is endurance. Real hope is standing firm when the world shakes, holding on to Jesus when everything else crumbles. If we cling only to the idea of escape, we weaken ourselves, our churches, and our witness. But if we embrace the call to remain faithful, no matter the cost, our faith becomes unshakable. Our hope becomes radiant. Our lives become testimony. The days ahead will demand courage, discernment, and steadfast love. They will not be easy. They will not be gentle. But they will reveal the glory of Jesus through those who refuse to be swept away by fear or false comfort. Do not chase comfort disguised as hope. Chase Jesus. Prepare your heart, sharpen your faith, and stand ready, not to disappear, but to endure, because the greatest victory of the church will not come from avoiding the darkness. It will come from shining through it. Stay awake, stay faithful, and above all, stay with him. Faith is not measured by how quickly we are taken out of the storm, but by how boldly we stand in it, with Jesus in the center of our hearts. And that, my friend, is the truth they don't want you to know, but the truth that will carry you through everything to come.